Hello.
Our story begins inside an LAAT departing from the executive building following the death of Master Windu. Commander Rex, as he was being titled now, following the separation of the 501st for the Siege of Mandalore, asked General Skywalker if everything was alright. The clones on Coruscant, for the most part, were sleeping. Rex was keeping up with any updates coming from Commander Oppo, the 332nd, and/or Ahsoka. He was worried about their progress and wanted to make sure they were faring well against the Mandalorians. They were fine. Ahsoka won, and that's all he wanted to tell his general. Anakin responded to his longtime clone brother that everything was wrong. The Jedi betrayed the Supreme Chancellor. He stopped them. There wasn't much added to the context of the statement. The clones inside the gunship all turned around and looked to one another as the LAAT lifted off the landing platforms and turned towards the Jedi Temple. Wind poured through the open bay doors as Rex tried to get a better understanding of what Anakin was saying. What did he mean that the Jedi betrayed the Supreme Chancellor? That alone was an outrageous statement from a Jedi. Skywalker turned towards his officer and told him that it didn't matter. It was dealt with. 4 members of the High Council were dead now. They were going to make things right. Rex tried to make sure that he understood what Anakin was trying to insinuate. Even if leadership inside the Jedi Order made a mistake, it didn't make everyone else a member of their plot. Surely they would have kept this decision away from the ears of their peers. Anakin shook his head. Things had to be made right. He said it again with madness. Rex started to panic. He didn't know what his friend was insinuating, but his men would not turn against the Jedi. They all experienced the grief of Tup's murder of Master Tiplar over Ringo Vinda. Commander Doom was still broken up about that, especially since Count Dooku killed her sister, Tip Lee. For the clones, the tragedy of Tiplar and Tip Lee was very real. They were sisters, like the clones were brothers. It would be like as if all of their clone brothers died during this war, with no survivors. It made the entire situation, aside from Tup literally participating in one of their deaths, all the more personal. Rex's shoulders squared a little more and he shook his head in front of Anakin, trying to break his concentration. Skywalker was trying extremely hard to validate his master's wishes. He was doing this for Padme, and there was only one man capable of stopping this: Rex. The clone commander felt his communicator buzz, but he silenced it just as the first audible beep slipped out of it. Anakin turned around looking Rex in the eye and demanding that he open up that communication, and Rex shook his head. All the men inside the transport started to slowly take their distance from their Jedi general. The 501st endured some of the worst in the war. They all trusted Anakin because he'd been a part of it with them. All of it, except for the carnage of Grell. Slowly in front of their eyes, there were signs of a power-hungry, poorly motivated Jedi general, and they knew that because they'd already killed one. One of their brothers was in prison for having executed a fallen Jedi. Everyone inside this LAAT experienced Krell's hatred firsthand, and they all, even without the Force, sensed it from Skywalker. He just eroded away in front of them. Rex had been directly threatened by Grell, held literally at lightsaber point by the Jedi General. He didn't buckle when Anakin's back stiffened, and he stood over his clone brother. Rex looked dead into Anakin's eyes as he again silenced the communicator that buzzed to life, and told him that they were not going to the Jedi Temple. They'd be going to the barracks so that he could cool his jets. Whatever he experienced with the Jedi Council was problematic, but if the Chancellor was reasonable, he'd see this as a minor mistake, not an entire Jedi Order problem. The other clones inside the gunship agreed with their clone commander. Even if Skywalker outranked Rex, they had their brother's side because they all agreed with him. Between their trauma with Pong Krell or Clone Trooper Tup, they understood what it meant to be frustrated at the Jedi, or distraught by the death of one. There was no reason to make this situation worse, and if he did, what would that say about Anakin? How might Ahsoka feel, or General Kenobi, or his friend Senator Amidala feel if he made this worse? Well, she was the key to all of this. Padme's life hung in the balance because of what Sidious could teach Anakin, and Rex noticed Skywalker's physical reaction to Padme's name. She was in imminent danger of dying in childbirth. Something had to be done. Anakin tried to figure out how he'd explain this to a gunship full of clones who held no personal romantic attachments, but instead, he grew more internally frustrated. Rex was making points about the situation that Skywalker couldn't really refute. The rest of the Jedi weren't the problem. Their leadership made a mistake. That's what Rex said. But Anakin asked himself, why in fact would they go to the temple if his main prerogative was to learn the methods of immortality? He wanted to save Padme. Killing the Jedi didn't matter in that equation. Anakin gripped one of the handlebars with his metallic hand and clenched hard. He was just trying to come back down from whatever high he felt inside the executive offices. Again, he was right back to where he started. He only knew about Plagueis because Palpatine told him, but Anakin chose the Jedi. And while he didn't think Yoda's advice was helpful, there were a lot of strong and important details inside of what he said. Skywalker chose to save Palpatine because he believed there was a better chance that he could tell him the secrets to saving Padme. Yet at the end of everything, something crossed Anakin's mind, and it played along with Rex's and his men's question of him. If Anakin was going to do something to protect someone else, why would it involve the immediate betrayal and death of 10,000 Jedi? Sure, Skywalker agreed that the next move of the Jedi Order would be against the Senate, but they were now without their leadership. The Jedi Council no longer had 4 of their members, all of which here on Coruscant, and maybe they'd see that trying to murder the head of the Senate wasn't a sound plan. Anakin's head spun around in circles. He started to grow nauseous. He felt weak in the spine for being convinced of this. The Jedi weren't a revenge-seeking violent order. If they wanted to destroy the Supreme Chancellor, they wouldn't because it would be revenge. The concept of Jedi versus Sith remained very absent from Anakin's ranging thoughts. He kept moving between Padme's life, who or who did not deserve to die, and how he could save his wife. The fate of the Jedi didn't really play a factor into this. Actually, coming to think of this for 3 seconds, if Palpatine was as worried about Padme's life as he was, then they wouldn't be attacking the Jedi Temple right now. The two of them would be, by quote, discovering the secrets together. Something was wrong, and because Anakin's thoughts started to run rampant, his concentration was broken and his senses were pulling in from somewhere else. Just as the Jedi Temple became visible from the gunship, Anakin fell to his knees. He could feel death and pain across the galaxy at an alarming rate. There were only 4,000 to 5,000 Jedi stationed on Coruscant, most of which being younglings, Padawans, archivists, and monks. These were the Jedi that avoided any aspect of the war, aside from the protection of the innocents. Other than that, they all spent their time either learning or praying. Skywalker knew what he was feeling because it was related to his guilt. He might have protected Palpatine without a second thought, but somewhere deep inside his heart, he felt that turning against Windu was a mistake. He didn't want to kill Mace, he was only saving his mentor. That same guilt, though, rushed through his heart and inside of his head like a tsunami. He couldn't stop it, and immediately his heart and head went to Ahsoka. Anakin felt her immediate worry from across the galaxy. She wasn't with Commander Appo inside the bridge of the Venator, because he wasn't the type of clone to openly participate in regular conversations. His mission was complete. He was waiting for his next orders. So she, after their ship departed into hyperspace, was walking around with Jesse when Order 66 came through the comlinks of every single clone on board. She was shot by a Jesse who did not flinch. Rex would have given Ahsoka a chance to react. Jesse did not. His orders came through and he immediately put a blaster bolt into her collarbone. Ahsoka's lightsabers activated, but she wasn't in a great position to protect herself. That's what Anakin felt inside the LAAT. Her terror. She was wounded, fighting with a bum arm and trying to save herself. Maul was a goner, and that didn't matter to anyone in the slightest. But Ahsoka had to maneuver through an entire Venator with one of the most lethal clone divisions in the entire galaxy, not to mention a unit that trained her and knew all of her moves. Anakin looked to Rex and pressed his hand to his temple. He made a mistake. This was his fault. He never should have listened to Palpatine. There were greater problems not being addressed. Anakin was blinded by his desire to save Padme that he didn't even consider how much of a burden he'd be carrying for Palpatine for seemingly no reason. Not only did Sidious want the Jedi dead, but he knew where the Separatist Council was. This to Skywalker, after actually thinking about it, rather than rushing off into the distance with adrenaline, changed his entire perspective. Rather than thinking of Dooku being the crutch of an argument against the Sith Lord, it was the Separatist Council. Either would have worked in all fairness, because they both took orders from Palpatine. But after quickly thinking of the situation thanks to Rex, Anakin realized that he could have just been with Ahsoka on Mandalore himself. It's where he would have preferred to have been, rather than on Coruscant. It's why he gave her the 501st, because he wanted to be there to help her out. Basically, the Separatist Council was responsible for the Battle of Coruscant. He would have never been on Coruscant if it weren't for the battle droids, not to mention the copious amounts of death all throughout the war. If Palpatine's intentions were pure, then surely he would have told someone about the droid armies and the location of the Separatist warlords. Anakin told Rex that they had to get to Mustafar. Just as he said that, they landed in front of the Jedi Temple. All of the clones were lining up in formation, awaiting orders from their Jedi General and Clone Commander. Rex followed Anakin out of the LAAT, with the other men behind him. The gunship lifted off and departed into the city, following their exit. Rex turned to the men. Each of them were a little robotic. Something felt off. Despite not having the Force, it, to Rex, reminded him of Tup. There was just a slight difference that made the clones feel drone-like, if you will. All of Tup's actions were highlighted by a seeming lack of control over his own body. These clones were just soulless. This was an army, and it was meant to be in formation. But very rarely did anyone other than Rex, Anakin, or Ahsoka, when she was still a member, give orders to anyone. One of the few exceptions had been Dogma, but that's pretty much where it stopped. Jesse, Oppo, and Vaughn were all trusted brothers, but Rex, unless he specifically authorized it, gave out orders himself. As was mentioned, the carnage of Krell traumatized the men of the 501st. It's why Rex gave out most of the orders. Anakin looked to his clone commander, asking if he assembled these men here, and he shook his head, but he told Anakin that whatever happens tonight, promise him that he won't sell his soul on a lie. Rex extended his arm when one of his men turned towards him and asked if he was ready. The clone's name was Fox. This was not Commander Fox of the Coruscant Guard, rather a completely different clone with the same name. Sergeant Fox of the 501st, or CT-0000-1010, was the only other in lore named clone of the 501st on Coruscant. He assembled the unit because the Supreme Chancellor asked him to do it when Rex wouldn't respond. The clone commander, with his helmet still under his arm, squinted, looking over to General Skywalker. He asked what their orders were because, while it was heavily insinuated, Anakin didn't tell him directly. Sergeant Fox spoke up, saying the word order, but Rex cut him off before anything else could come out. He wanted to hear it directly from General Skywalker. Anakin bowed his head and pursed his lips. They were supposed to wipe out the Jedi Order so that a civil war could be averted. Those were his direct words. Sergeant Fox nodded his head, waiting for his commander to get in line so that this assault could commence. Rex and the other few clones with him from the LAAT didn't move though. He remembered fives in this moment. Rex looked to the other clones in the division and figured out that something was wrong with them. The clones that weren't under this spell had to do something, but he didn't know what. The entire unit was brainwashed, ordered to kill the Jedi, and Anakin was at the heart of that order. The clone commander looked to Sergeant Fox and requested that he get back in formation and wait for further orders. They'd be ready to make their move in the coming minutes. Rex shoved Skywalker forward, putting his hand behind his back, and spoke to him quietly. The other clones from the gunship, not with Order 66, followed. Rex explained that if Anakin wanted to make things right, he would contact the temple and warn them of this attack. He could stay here and stall the army for as long as possible, but whatever was affecting their men could also affect him too at any point. He then admitted that it was probably related to what Tup and Five suffered from. So this entire operation relied on Skywalker. Rex would cut his communications because he didn't want whatever order the 501st received to be hitting him. There was no fixing it at this current point. Anakin tried to understand how Rex put this together, but there was no time for that. Rex already figured it out because of the mechanical-like reaction that Tup had after Tiplar's death. Whatever that was, they couldn't ignore it anymore. So Rex asked Anakin if he could trust him to do the right thing. Skywalker started to sort through his potential responses. He didn't really know what to say. He felt like things were going to fall apart if he didn't follow through with this. But Rex was right. If Jedi leadership did the crime, then why did the children of the Jedi Order need to face the punishment for it? That wasn't a fair trade. It was an exact representation of the Sith, and Anakin willingly let it happen. So, he would change that. He told Rex to do exactly as Rex planned. The clone commander didn't even wait for Anakin to tell him his own plan. He turned around, flipped his helmet on, and waved the other few clones from the LAAT with him to follow again. Skywalker got the message, and so he quickly got into contact with Syndralic as he rushed away from the staging grounds, which were filled with the entire present unit of the 501st. The Battlemaster was confused as to why Anakin was contacting him, but Anakin shifted the truth, telling the Jedi Master that the Chancellor told the clones that the Jedi betrayed the Republic. The 501st was outside the temple. Sin needed to raise the temple defenses and protect the structure for as long as possible. The mass death around the galaxy was felt, but only by those in deep meditation, like Shakti. The dark side was concealing everything, and Sin, after being made aware of the situation, could sense the fall of his peers, friends, and masters across the cosmos. They were being hunted down, and to protect the lives of every soul inside the temple, Syndralic activated the structure's defense mechanisms. At the same time, a mandatory evacuation took place. Thanks to contacts like Jar Jar Binks, who had loyalty to the Jedi Order for their service over the years, there were transports to assist with these departures. Commander Rex would hold the 501st for as long as he could at the staging grounds, but the Jedi had to act like their lives depended on it. The clone unit was one of the most effective in the galaxy for a reason. The men, the zombies if you will, stood emotionless outside the steps of the temple. Sure, Rex could infer that they were in formation and therefore weren't permitted to interact or socialize, but he'd always been very lax as their captain. Very rarely did he ever enforce Republic military standards of conduct. If it were a parade or something else, then sure, but not here. Even before battle, that was his deal with the clones. They could socialize and have their own pre-engagement rituals because it could be the last time they ever saw their brothers. This behavior here was not at all like the 501st he knew. While the temple started its evacuation with the Battlemaster preparing his defenses, Anakin contacted Padme. He told her to get out of the city. War was coming to Coruscant, and the safest place for her to be was on Naboo. She didn't really understand where his panic was coming from. He even wished that he brought up this conversation to her with a calm heart. Had he said go to Naboo so that they could raise the baby together, it probably would have worked better. But now there were questions and concerns for his safety. How does one explain that he murdered Mace Windu when the sworn enemy of the Jedi stood across from him? One doesn't. One actually lies, at least Anakin did. He just explained that a plague struck the clones and they were acting hostile, without provocation. She needed to go. Despite her better judgment, she decided to listen to Anakin's request. She wanted to be home anyways. Padme was growing increasingly tired, and it would be best for her to get off the capital world until after her maternity leave. Before Anakin could think of a reaction towards the Chancellor, he reached out to other contacts. By this point, he was warily wandering through the streets of Coruscant just outside the temple. He didn't need the clones hearing him, and he was searching for a non-clone transport away from the temple so he could stop Palpatine. First, he contacted Ahsoka to make sure she was okay. It buzzed, but she personally sent it to the busy code, basically insinuating that she was preoccupied with a more difficult situation, which was very accurate. She was currently hiding inside the ventilation shafts of the command ship. She nursed her collarbone wound and waited for the ship to depart from hyperspace. For now, she kept her distance from the clones after confirming that they executed Maul. To Anakin, this was confirmation that she was okay. Obi-Wan was Anakin's next contact, and he was, overly joyful. His confusion was understandable, but Skywalker was just happy for a moment that despite his sins, his closest friends were still alive. He then informed his master of everything. The rage that drove Anakin into betraying himself fell further and further the more time he actually spent understanding what he was about to do at the temple. Instead of telling Obi-Wan about what happened on Coruscant, he informed his master that they could end the war. The Separatist Council was hiding on Mustafar. If he could get there, the droid armies could be shot down. Obi-Wan copied, but he also warned Anakin. The clones turned on him. He didn't have any explanation as to why. He just wanted to make sure his boy was safe, wherever he was on Coruscant. Naturally, Obi-Wan assumed he was at Padme's apartment, which is why he warned Anakin. Kenobi then asked if Master Windu was aware, and Anakin skimmed around the truth, explaining that he went to confront the Chancellor. He hasn't heard back from Master Windu. So instead, he warned the temple, which Syndralic locked down. It all sounded too convoluted for Obi-Wan to ask questions about now. Surely he would learn the truth in the future. Kenobi just wished that the Force would be with Anakin, and then they ended the communication. Obi-Wan would do as his former apprentice suggested, by taking General Grievous' starfighter and departing from Mustafar. While Anakin tried to make good use of his skills by formulating a strategy, the clones at the Jedi Temple were growing impatient. Sergeant Fox knew something was off. That little bug inside his head kept ticking away. Fox couldn't help but feel like Rex was stalling, so he broke out of formation and approached the clone commander. Rex immediately told him to get back in line, and Fox agreed he would. But first, he needed to make sure he had the right orders from the Supreme Chancellor. Rex nodded his head again, ordering his man to get back in line. The other men from the gunship surrounded Fox and started pushing him backwards, as if he had done something wrong. The clone sergeant just demanded that Rex clarify what their orders were. The other clones started to get antsy, and Rex confirmed that he had specific orders from the Chancellor that overrode theirs. None of the clones knew that the Kaminoan inhibitor chips were voice activated, but Fox grew irritated. He threw it out. He told them that it was Order 66. They were going to execute the Jedi for treason against the Republic. They had to execute Order 66, or they'd be branded as traitors to the Republic, doomed to face court-martial for disobeying direct orders. In that instant, Rex switched. He stood motionless. The clones fighting with Fox stopped, and all resistance in the name of the Jedi Order ceased. Rex called to the men, telling them to turn towards the temple and begin their march. Thousands of men started up the steps of the ancient structure. Their boots echoed out, and they pushed up the stairs of the Jedi Temple. When they reached the top, hundreds of explosives were laid by the entrance, and the sealed doors were blown off, giving the clones access to what seemed to be a completely empty Jedi Temple. Rex told his men to fan out and find the Jedi to kill them. There could be no prisoners, not on their watch. Men moved through the hollowed halls of the Jedi structure. They searched for any sign of life. They poured through corridors, into rooms for any type of Jedi, rushed the archives, and blew the doors off the restricted section. Anywhere someone could hide was no one. The temple appeared to be lifeless. Rex, who stuck to the great hall of the structure, only watched his men peel off in the different corridors. He led the unit into the youngling corridor to see if there were any stragglers left behind. Each soldier fanned out to check a different room or two as they continued moving past one another. Rex himself stopped in one and stepped in. His finger rested over the trigger of his weapon, and he looked into the living quarters. He turned his flashlight on. The helmet robotically scanned the room when it landed on a boot sticking out from under the covers of the bed. As Rex walked over to it, he ripped the cover off and pointed the weapon at the youngling. His hand then shook. The Jedi was left behind because he didn't hear any of the commotion. Rex's pistol remained trained, but with an uneven twist because of his hand shaking. He spoke to himself under his breath, telling himself to find Fives, find him. For a moment, he wasn't inside the Jedi Temple, rather with his brother on some great adventure during the war. There, for a second, Rex was himself again. The blaster fell out of his hand and landed on the soft cot, not drawing a single sound, and ever so carefully, Rex backed out of the room. He was able to avoid murdering the youngling. It was a burden on his heart until the inhibitor chip took complete control over him, but by that point, he and his men were already rushing towards what they thought was a commotion. Instead, a Jedi trap had killed a dozen of his men. Across the city, Anakin entered the executive plaza. He walked with caution, but with the perfect plan. Once he slipped into the Chancellor's office, he saw Palpatine looking out the broken window. Sidious turned around and asked Lord Vader how the assault on the Jedi Temple went. He ever so briefly explained that it was an overwhelming success, asking if Palpatine could feel the rising darkness. The Sith Lord nodded his head, and Anakin crossed the room, hovering his hand over his weapon. Sidious smiled, and under his breath, he asked his apprentice if he took him for a fool. Anakin did not stop. He didn't even respond. Sidious pulled the strings further, telling Skywalker that he could not be betrayed, he could not be beaten. The Sith would win this war against the Jedi, regardless of Anakin's decisions here, because his child, Anakin's child, would become one of them, a Sith. Sidious looked at Lord Vader, who resembled the lost boy he met 13 years ago before Qui-Gon's death. He mocked Skywalker, asking if he had considered that outcome. If Master Windu and the brightest of the Jedi Council couldn't defeat him, what made Vader think that he would? And when Vader lost, which he would, what fate did he leave behind for his family? Sidious, of course, was pumping his own ego here, but he would need another student, and her child would make the perfect replacement for Lord Vader. A heartbroken mother, imagine it. Sidious referred to Shmi Skywalker, then to Padme. Anakin visualized his wife grieving the loss of their child and his own death. His lightsaber ignited and he jabbed forward at Palpatine. From a vase in the room, Sidious's spare lightsaber flung through the air, and at the last moment, bursted to life. It did not kill Anakin, but it cut straight through his metallic arm and left Skywalker to fall backwards on the soft carpets of the executive office. Palpatine again taunted Skywalker's victory over the Master of the Order as his own, reminding Anakin that like Maul, like Grievous, like Dooku, he could always be replaced. Lord Vader could be any Skywalker, not just Anakin. He then smiled, feeling that rage fled through his apprentice's body, asking him if he understood what power he could hold. It was all at his disposal. All he needed to do was trust his new and only master. But like a child, Anakin decided to act like a duplicitous Jedi. Lightning fled from the Chancellor's fingers and Anakin was covered in blue electricity. It covered his body and his face, and it burned unlike anything else ever had. Palpatine mocked his apprentice, telling Lord Vader that he could still learn. The prophecy of the Chosen One didn't need to blow out like a flame. They could still work together. But first, he needed to understand the cost of betrayal. More electricity fired and Skywalker cried out in agony as it again covered him. He wrestled across the ground, flipping, twisting, and turning with each bolt that connected with his skin. Even though his metallic hand had been removed, the open circuits in it only amplified his pain. Once again, the Sith Lord stopped, using the Force to break Skywalker's lightsaber apart and remove the kyber crystal within. Even if he tried to kill him, it would be to no avail, not without his Jedi weapon. Sidious then told Vader that this crystal would make a fine gift for his future apprentice. Did Anakin really want to be an absent father figure like Qui-Gon Jinn? There were choices to make, were there not? Palpatine remarked that he never minded being that figure for him. Surely Senator Amidala could use his support once Anakin was disposed of. Vader's heart sunk further into darkness, and his metallic arm flung forward. Sidious, in all of his glory and triumph, was caught in his own self-aggrandizing speech, and he couldn't react. With all the darkness of Anakin's soul pouring through his body, Vader lifted Darth Sidious off the ground. Palpatine watched Anakin become Vader, and it was remarkable. It fed him, but it was killing him. Anakin shoved harder with the Force as he rose from the floor. Across his visible skin, burn marks tingled with a sensation of darkness. Anakin pushed his master into the ceiling and crushed his windpipe with all of his strength. Sidious held on far longer than Anakin would have wanted to, but when he released his grip, Palpatine was dead. The Sith were destroyed, and Anakin was left again in this very office wondering if he had made the same mistake. The truth is, though, his greatest sin was always betraying Master Windu. Despite the Jedi escaping from the temple with the help of senators and/or representatives, like Bail Organa or Jar Jar Binks, there were still thousands of dead Jedi around the galaxy. The death of the Supreme Chancellor fell directly on Republic war hero Anakin Skywalker's shoulders. The Jedi weren't even there to blame, because they were forced from Coruscant before Palpatine's death. Skywalker ended up looking responsible for the deaths of Palpatine, Kit Fisto, Agan Kolar, Saesee Tiin, and Mace Windu. While he did participate in 2 of their deaths, this blame, personally for him, didn't land heavily on his shoulders. Mace and Palpatine were necessary losses. From the villa on Naboo, as the galaxy reacted to the chaotic change-up in the galactic capital, Anakin was with Padme after the birth of their twins, named Luke and Leia. Obi-Wan and Yoda didn't return to the capital. The Grand Master visited each of the 13 locations established by the Jedi Evacuation Code. The few thousand survivors of the Purge were pleased and inspired by the survival of the Grand Master. The Jedi youngling from the temple escaped into the underworld and would eventually find his way back to the Order thanks to Ahsoka's arrival on Coruscant. Obi-Wan, though, was meditating inside the villa, while Anakin and Padme celebrated the birth of their twins. With all the battle droids shut down and Commander Cody arresting the Separatist Council, thanks to Obi-Wan sending out a distress beacon to draw the clones in, the Clone War officially came to an end. There were no threats of a Separatist uprising, and the problem now remained for the Republic and the Confederacy's governments to sort out everything in between. With the Chancellor and Count Dooku gone, and the Sith with them, there was a chance for peace, without total destruction or a galactic empire. Atop the list of concerns for the government were the clones and their inhibitor chips. Just because the Jedi were the target today didn't mean the Senate was any safer tomorrow. The Kaminoans revealed the information about the inhibitor chips to the Republic through their senator, and then the clones were ordered to arrest every single one of them. The Jedi did not seek revenge against the clones for their actions. They could not blame them. They also did not return to Coruscant, finding refuge at 2 completely different temples. The Youngling Temple was the one on Dantooine, where Yoda would stay, and the training grounds on Tython is where Sindralic would operate. The political biases of the Order were flipped on their heads, and while it'd be fair to say that some members directly blamed Anakin for the activation of Order 66, he did not become a target of any of their members. Because the temple was only raided and not covered in death, the Grand Master chose to remove Anakin from the Order, rather than to do anything specifically to him. Despite Anakin getting a break from the Jedi, his life would forever be tarnished by his actions inside the executive building. The Jedi might have been forgiving to some degree, but the galactic population and the Senate were not. His marriage to Senator Amidala had to remain a secret, and he couldn't live in the villa with his family because the Republic put out a reward for his capture. The Senate didn't think that Palpatine was the bad guy, more of a victim. Skywalker was a traitor, and he would be treated as such if he was found. Anakin and his family could live off of neutral territory if they wanted, but it made his life a living hell. Padme and he were constantly separated because she remained a senator, and he was forced to work extra hard to keep in physical contact with his children. The clones weren't necessarily tasked with hunting him down, but if they saw him, they were ordered to capture him. This would be his eternal burden. This didn't make Padme resent him or the children to dislike him, it just forced everything to be in limbo all the time. Of course, it did allow Padme and Anakin to build better communication habits and work on their marriage from afar, which was positive. In the end, though, they were better for it. Once Padme retired from the Senate, it was easier for the entire family unit to operate as one. Not to say Anakin didn't sneak into the villa for periods of time, but they just couldn't risk it. Not with neighbors at least, and a reward as high as it was. While Luke and Leia were able to grow up with a semi-normal family unit, the Jedi recovered on Tython and Dantooine. The Republic didn't hold any grievances towards the Order because it seemed like Order 66 was a mistake, and the Jedi suffered enough for that anyways. Plus, Skywalker was the person that they all saw responsible for the murders inside the executive offices, so pretty much all blame went to Anakin. With the clones keeping the Republic safe and the government working its way back into an elected system post-Palpatine, the galaxy would be protected from the rise of an empire. There'd be challenges from separatist sympathizers, but nothing drastic enough to send the galaxy back into war. Rex, Ahsoka, and Obi-Wan were all survivors of a purge, and while their troubles could be traced back to Anakin's actions, each of them, over time, were able to eventually forgive him. They'd all be important to Luke and Leia as they grew up. Despite his crimes and despite the complete change of lifestyle because of his actions, Anakin still brought balance to the Force, and as a result was able to live the rest of his life with the happiness of a fully loved and loving family unit around him. And that, my friends, is a kind of foreboding story. Special thanks to all the patrons for supporting the channel. Sith Clone Wars out on Saturday. You know what it is. This is episode 34. Pretty psyched. Let's talk about this story, though. Story specifically, especially because I've done so many Revenge of the Sith what-ifs over the past couple years with you guys, this story was really meant to feel foreboding more than anything. I think it's very easy to kind of get taken for a loop with Revenge of the Sith stories and go like really easily down the action path, and I wanted this story to kind of feel foreboding. I didn't want a big duel between Palpatine and Anakin. I didn't want a big standoff inside the Jedi Temple. I really wanted this building tension to be present throughout the story. I think there's a lot of emotional weight that comes with Revenge of the Sith. It's a very dark episode in the saga, and I wanted to do a lot of that darkness, but without the action behind it. Revenge of the Sith is very action-based, and this story is definitely not. It's like I said, foreboding. It's like this dread, and that dread is like what kind of carries a story, I think, the most, is that it's just this dread of regret, this dread of really kind of facing the problems head on, because Rex is someone Anakin was really close to. And obviously the first thing he does is encounter his problems head on. Like, he walks into the LAAT and Rex is like, oh hey, I heard Ahsoka is coming back to Coruscant. And Anakin's like, oh, that's right, I forgot about that person because this movie came out before the Clone Wars. So, haha, that was a joke. But that dread is what I really wanted to be present, and I think it's most present both with Anakin's interaction with Palpatine the second time around, and also Rex's inhibitor chip-based interaction with that youngling. It's just like, it's this constant like, when's it gonna twist? When's it gonna twist? And that's really what I wanted you guys to experience with this story. It's like this, like when's it gonna go super dark? When is Sergeant Fox gonna snap on Rex? When is Rex gonna snap on the Jedi? Did the Jedi get out of the temple? When's Anakin gonna turn to the dark side? And I think all those things come together really pretty decently in the end. So I hope you all enjoyed this story. It's definitely more experimental on the side of just being based on being pulled by dread, but I hope you guys enjoyed it for that aspect. But I love you all. Spread the love. Always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.